start off before the war, in terms of the emigration,
Right.
your reasons for emigrating, and what life was like for you growing up in the Gorbals, I believe,
That's right.
where you told me.
Well, I was brought to Scotland in 1919 when I was 1 year old. The reason being, of course, that Italy was a very, very poor country. My father had just been demobbed from the Italian army. There was no work to be had. There were riots in the streets of the big cities, fascists against the Bolsheviks, and the whole country was in a turmoil, couldn't find work. The only place he could find work was in a place called Scotland. The local priest told him that there was a city called Glasgow to the north of England, and there were Italians there looking for workers. So my father packed his belongings and together with my brother and my mother finished up in Glasgow, where he began working as a labourer, as a helper in a fish and chip shop, and gathered together a few shillings, and then in the fullness of time got a shop of his own. I left school when I was about 13 or 14 because that was the expected thing to do. You had to go and help the family. So by this time my father had bought the shop where he originally worked when he first came to Glasgow, and together with my brother and mother, the four of us worked in the shop, and we became reasonably prosperous. The shop did well. I grew up in a dichotomous environment, Italian at home, Scots outside, Scottish friends mainly, very few Italian friends, because there weren't very many Italians in Glasgow in those days. Especially there weren't very many Northern Italians. And there is a big difference, and an even bigger difference 60 years ago, that a Northern Italian didn't mix so well with a Southern Italian. Italy had just been unified 50 years before that, you know. So anyhow, eventually war broke out, and the night that war broke out, was interned. Policeman came to the door, took me away to the police station. I was 3 days in a cell. After that we were taken to Maryhill military barracks. We were there for about 3 or 4 days. Then we were taken to a camp near Edinburgh called Woodhouse Lee, under canvas, and there we were mixed in with Italian merchant seamen who had been captured from their ships that were docked at Leith and Portobello. After about a week in that camp, we were put on a train and we finished up in an old disused factory called Worth Mills in Bury near Liverpool, and that was a bit of a hellhole. That there were packed to, it must have been about 5,000 or 6,000 people in this derelict warehouse. That it's very difficult. It was like something out of Dickens. Broken glass, dust in the air from the old mills that had been there, broken machinery. There were about 40 water taps, I was told afterwards, about 40 water taps for all the people that were there, about 5,000 people. You had to queue up for water, queue up to wash. The latrines were absolutely choked. You just did your needs in a corner. It wasn't pretty. Anyhow, we were there for a week. Then each morning there was a roll call, names would be called out, and my name was called out together with 403 other Italians. We were mixed in with a bunch of Germans. Most of them, as I remember it, were Jewish refugees, but there was one contingent of, I learned subsequently, about 700 soldiers, Marines, Luftwaffe men who had been shot down over France, Marines who had been captured at the Narvik landings in Norway, and we were all assembled on the docks at Liverpool. And there on the docks were two huge ships. The one that was moored directly beside us was bigger than the second one, which was moored slightly behind. And orders were given to start loading, and we walked up the queue started to walk up a gangplank onto a ship which I could see the name Arandora Star. And after about 5 or 6 hours loading, because it was loaded with only a single gangplank and you could only go up the gangplank one at a time, about 200 prisoners in front of me stopped, and we were then directed onto the second ship, which was called the Ettrick. I learned subsequently that the Arandora Star had sailed immediately after. She had been loaded. We waited for about another, possibly half a day, and then we sailed off too. On the Ettrick, since we were practically the first on, we went on deck and then immediately down some steps and then down steep stairs into a hold-like area which was big enough to hold 400 of us. I don't know what it was. It looked like a huge hold of some kind. There was no light, artificial light. The portholes were all sealed up and painted over, and we were there for, I think it was 13, 14 days. And when we finally saw the light of day again, we were in Quebec. That's where we landed. When I say when we first saw the light of day, we were allowed 15 minutes on deck each day, but a lot of the prisoners were too sick, seasickness, too apathetic. They didn't go on deck, although to go on deck was even worse because the decks were sealed off with barbed wire fencing, and we didn't give it any thought at the time, but if something had happened, we would have drowned like rats in a trap. There was no way. There was a gate, a barbed wire gate with a padlock outside, but even though the padlock were taken off in the event of something happening like happened to the Arandora Star, how could 400 people go through a door no bigger than that? You know, it's in retrospect, it was a floating coffin. We were very, very lucky that we didn't have the same fate as the Arandora Star people. Then from Halifax we boarded another train, and that took about a day, and we drew into Montreal station. We could see the signs, Montreal. Then we were unloaded from the train and we were put into 20 buses, 20 prisoners in each bus. And there were 2 guards already on the bus when we got on, and then when the 20 of us were on, another 2 guards stood at the entrance. We went through the city of Montreal, and then I remember distinctly crossing a big, huge bridge, and down below we could see searchlights and a low, dark stone building. And we crossed the bridge and came down, turned and drove into a gate which took you into a rectangular shaped square in front of the building, and their searchlights were shone on the bus. The door was open, we were yanked out, not very courteously, I'm afraid. Actually, we had been given food at Quebec, and it was the first fresh food we had had for about 14 days, and we were all hanging on to these food bags which consisted of lovely white bread, bits of cheese, butters and jams, and this was absolute feast for us. Well, these paper bags were torn from your hand. If you tried to pull them back, you'd be given a sharp whack with a baton or something, and then you were pulled, and orders were started to be shouted at us in German. There were signs in the camp and they were written in German. Nobody understood German, and the guards got the impression that we were being stubborn. We weren't obeying the orders we were given, and a few knocks were sustained by us. Anyhow, eventually we had one member of our group. We were assembled in groups of 20, seated on the ground, and it took about, I don't know, an hour, couple of hours for all the buses to be unloaded, and orders and questions were being shouted in German until finally one of our group, a fellow called Ralph Taglioni, who was manager of the Café Royal in London, Regent Street. I remember he put up his hand and he said, "Please sir, nobody here speaks German." So the officer said, "Well, what bloody language do you speak?" He says, "Well, we all speak English. We're English here from," he said, "I'm from London, some here from Scotland." And the officer's jaw dropped, and he turned round and he spoke to another officer, and they conferred with other officers, and then after that, treatment changed absolutely dramatically. We were no longer kicked, no longer shoved, no longer nudged with rifle butts, but we were given orders brusquely, but not a finger was laid on us. So we were then stripped of our clothes, which were rank. I mean, we had been in those clothes for about 3 weeks, and none of us had shaved, very few of us had washed. Our clothes, our rags were taken from us. We were all shoved through showers, warm showers with disinfectant in them, and then cold showers. Oh yes, before that all our body hair was clipped off with the shears, with the electric type thing, hair clippers, and all our body hair, everything, because we were all lice ridden, absolutely. We were shoved through these disinfectant showers, then cold shower, and then up into our bunk beds, and that was the beginning of my 3 years in Camp 43. So,
do you want to take a drink?
I've made it all very quick, but
No, that's fine. I'm just going to quickly check, Joe, that this is okay. Can I go back, Joe, to...
yes.
I'd like to go back, if it's okay with you, to the night of the 10th of June. Now, in the last interview, I know you owned a shop, a fish and chip shop, I believe, and your parents were away on holiday.
Correct.
And your brother was newlywed?
Newlywed, and he had an apartment of his own.
So on the night that yes, I suppose it was the night that Italy declared war on his country. I believe that you experienced some anti-Italian
Yes.
rioting.
Well, war broke out, I think it was in the morning of the 10th of June, and we learned about it. Remember, there were no televisions, or there was the wireless, the radio. It was a good, well into the afternoon before I was told that Italy had declared war. And a policeman friend of mine came into the shop and he advised me to close the shop. He said, "Look, Joe, we don't know what's going to happen. You better close the shop." And he said, "I'm not supposed to tell you, but we'll be coming in the middle of the night to pick you up. You're going to be arrested." So I closed the shop and I went to the apartment upstairs. We lived in a flat directly above the shop. By this time it was about 6 o'clock in the evening. And about an hour after that, I could hear shouts in the street below, and I looked out of the window and I could see a cart being pushed down Renfrew Street. That was where our shop was. And there were a crowd of, I don't know, possibly 50, 60, possibly even more, 100 people. And they were all shouting and swearing and bloody Italians, Italian bastards, and stopped in front of the shop, and one of them shouted, "That's a tally shop, do it in." So they smashed the windows, they put bricks through the windows, they bashed the door open with a improvised battering ram. It was big, tall wooden doors, and they vandalised the shop completely. Stripped all the fittings, broke them, took all the stock. Not that there was much stock to be taken, a few packets of cigarettes, because it was a fish and chip shop, we didn't carry much stock. But the shop was ruined, the shop was smashed, and I remember looking out of the window. I can't recall, I don't know what my feelings were, but I was a bit numb. I was probably scared, I probably was. And that was it. So this went on for about 15 minutes, maybe even more. And then they piled all the stones back onto the push cart and presumably went off to do another Italian shopping, you know. So I barricaded myself literally into the flat and tried to get some sleep, which wasn't easy, but I knew, I'd been forewarned that I was going to be arrested during the night. So I didn't take my clothes off or anything, I just sat, and at about 3 o'clock in the morning a knock came at the door, and there were 2 policemen who invited me to go along with them, and there waiting at the bottom of the steps was a black Maria. That was a name given to the police vans of those days. They were painted black. They were black vans with a little grille at the back. And they loaded me onto that, and there were already 4 Italians had already been picked up before me, and the 5 of us were taken to the Maitland Street police station, and we were put in a cell there and given mugs of tea. We were fairly treated, and the thing was that I knew practically every policeman in that police station because they had been regular customers of mine in the shop, you know. And there I was. I think we were there for a couple of days, something like that. And as I say, then we were taken to the Maryhill Barracks.
And after the Maryhill Barracks and then down to Wharf Mills, finally on to the docks.
Yeah.
Did you have any idea what was about to become of you?
We didn't have a clue. Everyone was saying, well, we're going to the Isle of Man. Lots of the Italians had memories of the First World War where Germans had gone to the Isle of Man. There were 1 or 2 German Jewish refugees there who were saying, yes, it's going to be the Isle of Man, it's going to be the Isle of Man. We didn't have a clue, but once we were on the ship and you're battened down in a hold and you say, well, the Isle of Man is only half an hour. Well, not from Glasgow, but it's only a couple of hours away from Glasgow. Why this? And then as time went on, it was obvious we weren't going to the Isle of Man. Absolutely obvious, you know. And I kept constantly going out on deck as often as I could, when I say deck, it was an area about the size of this room, all surrounded by barbed wire. And I could see, and I had a good knowledge of the geography of the place, and we were sailing, and I was absolutely convinced that what we had on our left-hand side was the north coast of Ireland, because we sailed up from Liverpool up through the Irish Sea, then turned left over the north coast of Ireland. And then it was then that some of the guards who were guarding us, because the decks were full of armed guards, and they were saying, oh, you're going to Canada, which, we go down and say, well, I'm told we're going to Canada. Impossible, they can't be taking us to Canada. They can't do that. Well, they can do anything they wanted, I suppose. But it was a shock,
Now you missed the Arandora Star by about
200 people, 200 men. Yeah.
And when you arrived at the quayside and you saw the Arandora Star, did you see any distinguishing features that kind of stick in your mind?
Well, all I saw was this huge ship, which looked huge. Remember, if you're standing beside a liner and the liner's towering up above you, it looked vast. It was grey, painted grey. I remember distinctly a gun on the back, a cannon. There were what to me were coils of barbed wire on the decks. I can only tell you what the Ettrick was like, but I have no idea what the Arandora Star was like on deck. But I could see wire of some description enclosing the deck, and I assume that it was the same as the Ettrick. The Ettrick deck were completely closed in by barbed wire fencing. Although subsequently, in view of what I've read about the Arandora Star, some of the Arandora prisoners were actually sleeping on deck when the torpedo struck, and some of them were blown by the explosion into the sea. So presumably not all of the deck area was covered in with barbed wire, but the Ettrick was completely encased in barbed wire.
Needless to say then, when you boarded the Ettrick, were there any health and safety regulations?
You must be joking. Health and safety regulations. Well, that's worth a laugh. No, you were just shoved down the stairs. I always remember a wee sergeant, red with anger. He must have been red with whiskey probably too, shouting, "Get down those steps, you bees," you know. And that was it, and you were left to your own resources. As far as health and safety, you're left to yourself.
No life jacket training, no.
Not a word. We had absolutely no contact with anybody who told us anything. Had a torpedo struck when we were in that hold, 407 of us, as it turned out, 407 would have just drowned like rats in a trap. Yeah.
So you suffered the experience, and then you ended up in Canada after the unfortunate night when they discovered that you weren't Germans, and they started treating you a bit more civilised. Were you in communication? How did your family know that you'd been taken to Canada?
My family first knew that I'd been taken to Canada, believe it or not, because they were told by one of the guards who had been on the Ettrick. Now, when I went up on deck to get some fresh air, there were armed guards there, and some of them offered us cigarettes through the wire. They were quite pleasant, you know, and one of them spoke with a Scottish accent. And I said, "Well, where are you from?" He said, "From Maryhill Road." And he said, "Where are you?" I said, "I've got the Savoy chip shop." "Oh," he said, I know it well." I said, "Look, you go back to Glasgow. Could you go there? And if my father and mother happened to be there," I gave them the house address, "would you tell them that I'm on a ship going to Canada?" Well, believe it or not, about 6 weeks after that, he must have got a leave, and he went and he told my parents that their son, he had met their son on a ship going to Canada. So they knew before they were officially informed by the Red Cross. They eventually got, because they went to the police station. The police station would give them no information as to where their son was. Then they went back, but were told he's in Canada, and how do you know he's in Canada? Anyhow, they eventually were put onto the International Red Cross, and I would say that official notification was given of our whereabouts maybe about 4 months after we had landed in Montreal, and then we began to get Red Cross parcels. But for a good period of time, the families of those on the Ettrick had no idea where their sons were. They could have drowned on the Arandora Star, if you know.
Did you have a tribunal at any point in your time?
Sorry,
did you have a tribunal? Were you offered a tribunal?
Yes. Give the British their due. I mean, in the middle of a war, they found time to send a Home Office representative, a Mr. Patterson, who came into the camp every morning, sat in the soldiers' quarters, and anybody who wanted to see him in the camp was free to do so. And I think he came for, probably every day for maybe a month, quite a long period of time. And 40 people went back. I didn't go to be interviewed. Why didn't I go looking back? I suppose I had a chip in my shoulder. I felt that I had been badly treated. I had been arrested for no good reason. A lot of them who went for an interview were given release provided they joined the British Army. Well, at that time, my sentiments to the British Army weren't all that great in view of the fact of the way I had been treated, so I didn't even go to see him. As a result of his visit there, about 40 internees were returned. Some of them went to the Pioneer Corps, the bulk of them went to the Pioneer Corps. But yes, give the government their due. They did give you a tribunal when it was too late. Had the tribunal been given at the time of the arrest or before the arrest, all that followed from that wouldn't have been necessary.
And what was the feeling towards the people who did go to see Mr. Patterson and people who didn't? Was there an element of fear?
Oh yes. Now again, remember our camp. I would say that 50% were people like myself who didn't want to bother about politics. 50% were fascist. Remember, of that 50%, we had 150 sailors who were pure Italian, in inverted commas, and they were all fascist. And anybody, they looked upon us as, here are people that speak 2 languages, that can speak to the guards. They speak English amongst themselves. Some of them don't speak Italian. So there already was a division within the camp, us versus the sailors. Now, if you put into that mix people who are actively going back to fight against Italy, well, the tension in the camp was quite unbearable, really. And to be absolutely honest at this stage, how much of my unwillingness to go and see Mr. Patton, how much was it motivated, and I've got to be honest about it, how much was it motivated by fear? You know, fear. I didn't want to go back and join the British Army, that was certain, but how much of that was due to the fact that I was fear of what would happen inside the camp, because we were literally divided into 2 groups, and there were lots of stabbings and lots of fights, and that's another story that, anyhow, it's not part of this.
Was there any positive that came out of the camp? Because I believe you were interned with quite high academic...
For me, the camp, I call it my college days. After we got over the rough handling of the first days, and you got used to the strict discipline of the camp, because it was strictly disciplined, you're up at a certain time, you get counted, you get fed, you volunteer for work if you want to, but everywhere you went, you were taken on work parties on the island, you were under guard with fixed bayonets, you weren't allowed to have any contact with civilians. Life in the camp was very, very strict. It wasn't an internment camp, but it was a POW camp run along POW lines. But in the camp we had lots of academics and lots of university people. We had professors of English, professors of Italian. We had Barocas, who had been assistant to the Astronomer Royal in Greenwich. We had a fellow called George Martinez, whose father had founded the Pieri tyre company in Southampton. He was a graduate of Naples University and had duplicated his degree at Cambridge. We had some school teachers, and they set up classes, and I attended every class I could. And I say that that's where I got my education, such as it is. And I call it my college days. I tried to put it to good use. I learned to speak German. I broadened my knowledge of everything. I began to realise that the world didn't consist just of a fish and chip shop, but there were other things out there. And I call it my college days.
So you say at the start of the interview it was 3 years you were interning.
Yeah.
So when Italy capitulated, is that when you returned? Or?
When Italy capitulated, we were no longer enemy aliens. So all you had to do, I want to go back home, right? And about 40 or 50 of us, all civilians, we were told we would be free, but we had to wait for a convoy to take us across. And we waited for, it was finally November. It was August, I think, when, I'm not sure when Mussolini capitulated. August, that's right. And I was finally released in November. I crossed the Atlantic, I think, September. Then I spent a couple of months in a camp on the Isle of Man until my father and mother found work for me. One of the conditions of your release was that you had to do work of national importance, which consisted of working on a farm or working in the mines or doing something constructive for the economy of the country. And I had to wait until my final papers came through from the Home Office giving me permission to work on a farm near Glasgow.
And then subsequently you went to work on the farm and...
I went to work on the farm. the war was still on with Germany, although Italy was now an ally. And I worked in a farm, worked in several different farms, worked in a piggery for about, I would say about two years, possibly even more. And I couldn't work in the family business, which incidentally had been kept going by my father and mother during the war, at great sacrifice, if I may say so, because they were elderly and they kept the shop open for 2 days a week so that they could get enough money to pay the rent so that their sons would have a shop to come back to at the end of the war. And my brother, incidentally, was in the British Army. He was in the British Army. He was called up for the British Army immediately after the outbreak of the war with Italy.
Was he born in Britain then?
No, he was born in America. He was born in America, where my father had been before the First World War. My brother, who was 6 years older than I am, was born in St. Paul, Minnesota. And my father came back to join the Italian army in the First World War, and then couldn't get back to America because America had set up an immigration quota barring Italians, you know. So my brother was not Italian. He was officially born in America. So he was called up for the British Army.
But if he was an American citizen, what was he?
Well, I think he was given the option. You know, he was called up. That's about it. Now the reasons behind it, I have no idea.
Now, so
because another thing, because subsequently, my brother always travelled with a British passport, and I always travelled with an Italian passport. So he must have been considered, or whether he applied for citizenship, I don't know.
So you have here on one hand you've got an enemy alien, and then on the other hand you've got a British.
Yeah, a British soldier. Yes. I mean, the thing was chaotic.
What was the reaction when your mum and dad saw you then after 3 years, or maybe 4 years?
Yeah. Well, you know. Well, what's the reaction? Their sons were back. They were happy. My brother was still in the army. He wasn't demobbed till 1946. And I'm afraid I cheated a wee bit. I mean, I would work in the farm during the day and then I would nip into the shop and work in the shop at night to earn myself a couple of shillings, you know, because I was paid, what, £3 a week or something in the farm. And there was money to be made in the shop if you had the nerve to open it. Now, it takes... If you've been an enemy alien and you've been in a prison camp and you've been shoved and kicked and booted about and jabbed with a bayonet if you didn't obey orders, and you come back to a country that's fought hard and has been bombed and you've been an enemy alien, and to go and stand behind a counter and serve the very people that consider you an enemy alien, I had to ease myself into it, you know, 5 minutes at a time, 10 minutes at a time. Always remember, the worst experience I had of being interned under the conditions that I was interned is the moment of release, when you've got to mix again with the people that have put you inside barbed wire. Always remember, the worst experience I had in my 3 years of internment was the day I was released from the Isle of Man. I was given a train ticket. I was given a few shillings in my pocket. I was put in a ferry and told, get a train and go home. I arrived at Liverpool station and I must have looked like a scrubbed convict or something. They had given me clothes because I had no clothes of my own. And I'm standing on the station platform. There are British soldiers all over the place. The train came in to go to Glasgow. I got into a compartment full of soldiers, men and women, going home and leave. And I'm the only civilian there. And okay, they didn't know I was Italian because I spoke just as good English, or Scots, most of them were Scots, as they did. And they were trying to bring me into their conversation. And here I am sitting, I'm an ex-enemy alien. What would these people think if they knew I'd been a prisoner for 3 years? So I pretended to go to sleep, and I eventually did go to sleep. And then I was literally afraid to walk the pavements. It's as though there's a spring inside you that knots up and helps you cope with the psychology of being a prisoner. Then you're released and the spring breaks and you're free, but you're still a prisoner, because the people around you were the people that had put you in behind barbed wire. So you're alone, you're isolated, you know. So for an internee, the imprisonment doesn't stop at the moment of release from barbed wire. Psychologically, it goes on for a long time after that.
Did you consider yourself as an enemy alien, as an enemy of this country, or was your allegiance to it?
I was labelled as an enemy alien. I was labelled as an enemy alien. I wasn't an enemy. All my friends were Scottish. I finished up marrying a Scottish girl. But they had labelled me an enemy alien. So the choice was not mine. They made me an enemy alien. And to be behind barbed wire for 3 years and to be treated initially as we were treated, and even for 3 years, I mean, you're taken out in work parties and you have a uniform, you know, with a red stripe down the trousers and a red ball in the back. You know, it's a prisoner's uniform. So they made you that, and it never wears off. You know, the feeling of being ostracised by the society in which you've lived.
Just say, for example, that they would have given you, because many refugees, when they, on first arrival, German, Austrian, Czechoslovakian refugees, they had a chance to have a tribunal. However, that made no matter, because even Class C aliens were then interned. Around 70,000 people were interned altogether. Even people who had a tribunal. If you did have the chance to have a tribunal, if Mr. Patterson had seen you before you even embarked on the Ettrick, before all your experiences, would you have said that your allegiance was to Britain, or your allegiance would have been to Italy?
Well, 65 years after the event, I can't really answer. I don't know how I would have. I don't know how I would have reacted. I would have. I'd be inventing something if I told you. I don't know. I don't know. I suppose I would have peer pressure. I would have said, all right, I'll join the army. Peer pressure, you know. But in view of what had happened to me, no, I dug my heels in. No, I'm staying where I am. You've put me here, you've classed me as an enemy alien. Right, that's what I am.
I think from the other interviews I've done, Joe, that's one of the defining factors. From another, you know him actually. You've met him in the Isle of Man. I'll come from Canada. Cavalli.
Cavalli, right.
Albert Cavalli.
Yes.
I asked him if he was embittered by at any point about his experience. He goes, no, we expected to be interned. I believe what you said there about the Italians, you know, knowing about the Germans in the First World War.
Yeah.
And he said, we expected. He goes, what I didn't like, because aliens went to internment camps, but 18Bs like himself went to prison.
To prison.
And he was in Brixton Prison for 6 months.
Right.
And I said, so did you come out with a criminal record? He goes, no. On the door it said unconvicted criminal.
Right.
Or unconvicted prisoner, rather.
Right.
And he said that's the only thing he resents, is being, because, you know, subject to all prison regulations.
Right. Well,
23 hours a day locked up.
Yeah.
Slops out.
Right. Well.
And everyone's got I suppose, because no one actually asked you, did they? No one actually asked you where. That you're more automatically deemed to be an enemy of this country.
Well, that's right. You know, you're going along. You've lived in that country all your life. You've worked it. Your friends are Scottish. You've one or two Italian friends, but they're in a minority. So Italy declares war, and suddenly you're an enemy alien, and they make you an enemy, even though you weren't. They say you're an enemy alien, and they shove you behind barbed wire. I mean, you know.
I suppose, I mean, before the Second World War broke out, you know, it sounds like you had a business, you were integrating into society.
Yes. Nobody gave politics a thought. I mean, I was in my teens. Who thinks about politics? Who thinks about what your status is? I consider myself the same as anybody else walking the streets. I only had an Italian name. I spoke Italian at home. But I was completely, fully integrated into the society in which I lived at the time. And suddenly, something happens, and you're told by that society you're an enemy alien. You're not given a chance to talk to anybody, to explain, or to be... You're grabbed, you're put in a prison cell, you're put in a camp, from a camp you're put in a ship, from a ship you're put in another camp. And whether you like it or not, that's what they consider me, and so, okay.
Right. I suppose before that time, I mean, do you mind me asking how old you were, or what year you were born?
Yeah. How old was I? I was 1919, 1940. I was 20 years of age when Italy declared war.
So a very young man working in the family business.
Yes, no education. I mean, no education in the sense that I never gave politics a thought. Okay, I knew that Mussolini was dictator of Italy, and I knew about Adolf Hitler. He had declared war. But you don't, you know, in your late teens, all you're thinking about is making half a crown and going out with a girl or going to the pictures, and you don't give politics, or you're just another citizen.
I suppose it must have been a very different time to the time I'm living in. I mean, I'm watching the stuff at the moment with Britain and Iran.
Yeah.
With the, you know, with the captured
right.
with captured seamen there, and you know, I'm being bombarded with information. You know, I can watch it on News 24, I can watch it on Sky, but I suppose...
Yeah, well, not only that, you can watch it, if you want a balanced view, you can go on to other news sources. I watch Al Jazeera, you know, the Arabic station, which in the English, and it's marvellous. I mean, it gives you world news, it gives you another perspective. Go into a European news channel, and that gives you another perspective. You can have a very, very broad view of what's going on in the world. But in those days, what did you have? You had nothing. I mean, houses didn't have a telephone. The radio was beginning to come on. We called it the wireless. Television unheard of. The newspapers, yes, but they were mainly one or two, the spreadsheets, good papers, but you were limited to the Daily Record, the Daily Express, which were jingoistic newspapers. You know, you couldn't form a broad view of anything. Especially with my background of no education and
was there a press campaign against the aliens in this country at the time from, you know, the jingoistic papers?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And the campaign started, I think. The campaign started at the time of the Spanish Civil War. That's when my political knowledge began to expand a wee bit, you know. Spanish Civil War, and Russia supported the Republicans, Germany and Italy supported Franco, Italy sent a division of troops to fight in Spain, Germany sent airmen, the famous Condor division that bombed Guernica, and the papers seized upon it, and there was the beginning of the animosity towards the Italians, because not only was the Spanish Civil War, but there was a war in Abyssinia. That had created a great antagonism against Italians. And sometimes customers would come in and swear at you because you had invaded Abyssinia. Well, I haven't invaded Abyssinia, you know. But all this was because of the jingoistic press, which you get jingoist, the same jingoistic press exists now, you know. And for people who read only that type of newspaper, they have a very fixed and narrow view of what's going on in the world.